So on the right hand side, you've got things like exposure, you've got highlights and shadows. The first thing I like to do is actually kind of mess around with the sky a little bit. And now, one of the new things that they've added to Lightroom, literally like in the past week, is this new like selection tool for the sky and things like that. Well, we're going to experiment with that and see how it works. So those all start up here at the top right where you've got your masking. All right. And now you can select a mask. I'm going to select the sky. And now in Lightroom, they have all this AI that will actually do this for you. Whereas before you'd have to actually do this manually. So I'm going to hit sky. You can see that it's doing its thing. And holy crap, like it literally selected the sky, and that's in red. You can change this color. Usually red's default, but let's say if you're got something else is red or something like that, you can choose a different color, as you can see. But I'm just gonna stick with red. Actually, that green's pretty good. Like you can see how it's kind of leaking off into the rocks and stuff a little bit. But at least anything, that's a pretty good selection, and we can refine that a little bit later, and I'll show you guys how to do that. So it stays selected until you actually do a change over here on the effects. And usually on something like this, I want to lower the exposure a little bit to make the sky a little bit darker. So once I take this and I start dragging that down, you can see the sky's getting a little darker. You know, it's okay. It doesn't need to be that dark. So I'm just going to double click on the exposure here, and that resets it back to the start. I'll actually start with something like dehaze instead. So I'm gonna go like this, and you can see how dehaze kind of brings the blues out a little bit more, and also the kind of the structure in the clouds a little bit. You can do that a little bit more with the clarity as well. So I'm gonna drag that over a little bit. And this part is not really much of a science, right? It's just whatever looks good to you is you know, it's not like you have to have exact numbers and things like that. And then I'm going to hit the texture a little bit too, just to get a little bit more sharpness out of some of the clouds. So that's looking pretty good, but there's a few other things you can do to this as well. So you can do things like temperature and color and saturation and stuff like that. Let's bring the highlights down a little bit. And very, very small change. You can see some of the kind of bright whites over here. It changes it just a slight bit. So if I increase it, you can see how bright that white gets, and you don't want to do that because you're going to blow out your highlights. So we'll bring that down a little bit, and maybe some of the blacks. Ooh, if I bring the blacks, it gets kind of this nice, really crisp effect like that. Okay, I think that's pretty good. But again, well, we had a little bit, if I select this overlay, you can see that some of it was actually kind of leaking off into the water and stuff like that. So if I want to get rid of that, actually what you want to hit is subtract. And I'm just going to take a brush here. And now that I have this brush, I can increase the size by just kind of rolling the mouse again. Andy, what's up, man? And then I definitely don't want to hit this bottom. So when I click here, I'm going to hold down the shift key, and that'll keep it straight. And if I drag across, you can see it's getting rid of some of the green stuff that's at the bottom there. So now we can make sure that that's not affected by that mask. All right, and then if I turn that overlay off, that's pretty good. Now that we've got the sky done, maybe we want to work on the foreground, right? So what I'll do is I'm going to go to this mask up here, and I'm going to hit duplicate. And you see, because I duplicated it, it just stacked it on top of the other mask. And so I don't want to do that. So what I want to do instead is actually invert it. So if I'm going to select this, and there is an invert over here, where is my sky, okay? And I hit invert. And now it's selecting the foreground. So if I hit show overlay, now you got the foreground. Let's change the color of this overlay to like a red, so we know the difference between the two. So we've got the green for the sky, we got the red for the foreground. So now that I have it selected, I can make some adjustments, and notice that it kept, because I duplicated the original one for the sky, it kept all the adjustments there before. So let's reset that. So I'm gonna double click on this and this, on all these actually. I think I can just go double click effect and it resets everything. And then I want to make some changes to the foreground here. So let's do some stuff. Let's add some temperature to that. So notice how it was kind of grayish sand, kind of blah. With the temperature, you can actually do some crazy stuff on this, but I'm gonna make the sand kind of stand out a little bit more, like more reddish orange, and I can change the tint a little bit as well. And notice it's affecting the rock, so we're gonna get rid of that a little bit later. And then I'm gonna add some texture to kind of bring out some of the sharpness and a little bit of clarity as well. Notice also it's also affecting the water, so we definitely want to make sure it only affects this portion of the sand. So what I can do here is I can actually subtract stuff in the water. There's a couple of ways you can do that. If you hit subtract and you go color range, this is interesting. So it's going to take a range of color that you select, and then it's going to take that out. So if I don't want to remove this portion of it, it's looking for that color, and see, because this color is very similar to the water, it actually subtracted all that. So that's not what I want to do. Let's do it instead. We'll just do another brush, and that's a subtract, and we're gonna get rid of that here. And you can't really see it very well, so let me put the overlay back on. Okay, there we go. And now I'm just gonna erase all the red that we had previously, including the rock. I don't want the rock this time, just want the sand. And a lot of times you want to change your sizes and stuff like this while you do it, just to make sure that you get all the stuff that you actually want to affect. But since we have this set to auto mask, it's going to automatically look for those edges and things like that, and try to make that mask. Jeremy, what's up, dude? Alright, so I got rid of that mask there. And now it should really only be the sand, so if I take that out, there you go. So that sand's really standing out. Let's say I want to reduce the exposure a little bit, like that, and then maybe increase the contrast a little bit more. Alright, so that's pretty decent. I'm going to go back to the sky, and let's go back to my sky mask. Now, for best practice, if you're doing this a lot, you probably want to name these things. So you can double click and we'll call this sky, and then I'm going to call this one sand. So that way it's easier to remember. And you can also dock this, so you can actually drag this over here if you want to, but by default it just kind of stays up in that little corner right there. So anyway, I'm going to go back to the sky, and I'm going to make some changes. So let's say I want to change the temperature of this. Let's make it like super blue and do that. You can even make it a little bit more magenta there. That's pretty good. Okay, so I'm pretty good with that overall, so I'm gonna close that,